publishing books about China since 1979, so we had our 30th anniversary recently, and since we started publishing, things have changed enormously. Print is not as, for want of a better word, sexy as it used to be. People tend to read on screen, they read on their Blackberries, they read on 100 different devices, not just books. And that's tough. I think we've tried to deal with that challenge by not giving up printing. Absolutely, we love books and we're going to continue publishing books. But what we want to do is to take our books' contents, which are very heavy on culture and history. We're travel publishers, but unlike Lonely Planet, for example, we don't do lots of telephone numbers and where you get your where you catch the bus. We don't do that kind of stuff. Our books are aimed at the top end of the market, and they're much more about culture and history and place in depth. We specialize in China and the Silk Road, and our China special I think has brought us to the conclusion that too many people go to China too fast without enough background. And what we really want to do is to encourage people to do a little bit more homework before they go to China, and as a result be able to go into negotiations with their Chinese partners from a certain position of strength. I mean, it's quite possible in China that you will know more about China than your hosts will. I found this over and over again. Many successful business people in China have put all their energies into the business and very little into studying their own history and culture. So it gives you some high ground if you can surprise people by telling them that you knew when the Battle of the Red Cliffs took place, for example. I'm not kidding. This is the way to be taken seriously in China. And I would say, if you make the study of Chinese history one of your hobbies, if you're going to China, and you have even a little knowledge of Chinese history, you're going to be ahead of your competitors, and you'll probably be ahead of your hosts, which amuses me. The simple answer to that is that unlike our pairs, the Lonely Planets and the Rough Guys and the Dorling Kindersleys, we give vastly more historic and cultural background, but written in a way which is extremely entertaining. These are not slogs at all. These are fun to read, with literary extracts, with very nice, amusing introductions by people like Janet Karmosky, who you'll have heard of before, I'm sure, and USA Today correspondents, Time, Newsweek correspondents have all contributed, and top photographers, people like Orville Schell and Peter Hessler, for example, have written for us. And I think what we're excited about going forward into 2011 is that we saw a wonderful opportunity that morphed out of a book that we're doing on the history of aviation in China, the first 100 years. So there we were putting this book together, and we started to see that there were all these events that were quite remarkable. The first flight in Shanghai, February the 21st, 1911. The first flight in Hong Kong, 18th of March, 1911. And then through the year, all sorts of things happened in China and indeed in the region related to the very early days of flight air. So we were looking at how can we leverage that? How can we make out of this centennial year a learning opportunity, workshops, seminars? Who would we aim those at? And we felt we'd go to the aviation industry. It so happens that in early March of next year in Hong Kong, we have the equivalent of the Asian Aerospace Fair. There will be a lot of aviation people there, and that neatly sandwiches between the Shanghai Centennial and the Hong Kong Centennial. Unfortunately, that sandwich is a little too wide for us to persuade people to stay for the whole 3 weeks, I think. But the idea is that we will offer people interested in the future of aviation in China 3 days in Shanghai, 3 days in Hong Kong, and 3 days in Beijing. So it's a 3-city format, and in every case we hope to partner with the Peninsula Hotel Group, partly because the Peninsula Hotels have the most marvelous aviation lounges. They are very special, and there's really no competition at all. Just the right size for our guests to have fairly intimate briefings in the morning. On day one, for example, we'll be talking about the history of aviation in China. In the afternoon, we'll be looking around the history of Shanghai, not specifically about aviation, but just about how Shanghai grew up and developed. But aviation, of course, is a very important part of that. In Hong Kong, the same. The Peninsula Air has a wonderful aviation lounge. We'll be talking about the history of aviation in South China. amazing stories. We've got 100 different aviation stories. The afternoon we'll be looking perhaps at the airport. We'll have, we hope, the Director General of Civil Aviation here in Hong Kong talking about the future of aviation in the region. Looking at between 8 and 10 decision makers from the aviation industry, not the same people necessarily coming to all 3 cities, but that would be perfectly possible, and they would get a discount if they did. But we envisage people from Boeing, from Pratt & Whitney, from General Electric, maybe from aviation insurance, from aviation leasing, not necessarily the capo di capi, but very senior decision makers who see the Chinese and the Asian market as being exceedingly important, and would like, next time they come to do business in the region, to be able to talk to their clients much more knowledgeably about the early days of aviation in China, because it is a fabulous, incredibly romantic story. Best hotel, I think the Peninsula in Shanghai is simply the best hotel in Asia, some say in the world. The Peninsula in Hong Kong, of course, is absolutely legendary. The great thing about Beijing as a venue is that although the Peninsula in Beijing doesn't have a specific aviation content within the hotel, the Chinese Museum of Aviation is an hour and a half's drive from Beijing, and it's an amazing museum. It's built inside an enormous cavern that Mao Zedong had hollowed out during the Cold War as a bunker, and that's unlike the Smithsonian. Unlike the Smithsonian in DC, the Chinese keep all their aircraft in this enormous cave, and that's pretty good. But you know, we'll do the cave in the morning, and then maybe in the afternoon we'll try and do the Great Wall. But not the exciting thing about Beijing, I think, is that we really want to go back to the beginning, and this is kind of radical when you're talking about aviation. We want to take people out to the site of the Peking Man Cave, which is 800,000 years old. People think, you go to Beijing now and you think, my God, this city is ultra-modern, it's the state of the future. Much of it, you know, Hutong's mostly gone now, it's all so mod. But actually, people have been living in Peking, Beijing, for, we've got a great working list of people who are both aviation historians. Cliff Dunaway here in Hong Kong, who is the president of the Hong Kong Historic Aircraft Association, who has put together also Michael Kuduri's aviation lounges in the various peninsulas, currently working on aviation exhibit at the Peninsula, which will open in Paris in 2012, for which they're making, I believe, a facsimile of the Blériot. So people like Cliff, who will be doing the past, but for the future we're hoping, as I say, to have the Director General of Civil Aviation here in Hong Kong, and in Shanghai we would hope to have the equivalent. We'd have somebody very senior in Beijing from CNAC. But the idea here is to talk about the past and the future. We don't want to be locked in the past, but we feel that, to quote the great helmsman, you understand the past, you understand the future by understanding the past. And of course he was quoting much earlier writers. But China, with 5,000 years of history, really does merit more before you make a business trip than just, you know, a quick read on the plane, the introduction to your guidebook. You really have to work harder than that if you want to score points in China. The more you put in, the more you'll get out.